Standards Pavilion at COP. We're very happy to be part of it. And thank you also to ICEAL for supporting our participation. This is a great opportunity for Better Cotton alongside other members of this pavilion to show the role that international standards can play in advancing climate action and driving impact at scale. For us, it's also an opportunity to perhaps not represent per se, but amplify a little bit the voices of the many smallholder farmers that are not present today, and account for some of the realities that they're facing. So for those who don't know us, Better Cotton is a global not-for-profit multi-stakeholder organization that supports farmers to produce better cotton, which is cotton that is better for the environment and the people. So more sustainable cotton, more equitable cotton. We have 5 categories of members that include retailers and brands, manufacturers and suppliers, civil society, independent voices, and producers. And in about 15 years, we've aligned more than 1/5 of global cotton with our standard and helped more than 2 million farmers and farming communities around the world across mainly 10 countries where we have direct operations, thanks to our many program partners that we have in those countries. So we acknowledge the importance of course, as a multi-stakeholder initiative, the importance of knowledge sharing and collaboration. And to develop comprehensive solutions to climate challenges. And I'm pleased to welcome to this panel discussion a unique set of speakers that will bring perspectives from Better Cotton as a voluntary sustainability standard, Solidaridad to give the civil society sort of perspective, and then artistic milliners from the supply chain. So Nancy, welcome to you. You're business development manager at Solidaridad. You're based in Zimbabwe. You've been working mainly with smallholder farmers, I believe, and will be talking to us about the work that you've been doing in South Africa and Mozambique, among others, where we partner together, Solidaridad and Better Cotton. Saqib, thanks also for joining us coming from Pakistan. You're the lead of responsible business projects at Artistic Milliners, one of our members as well. And you remembered me that the first Better Cotton bale actually is from Pakistan. So you've been really part of the journey from the very beginning. And then Lars, our impact director at Better Cotton, oversees our work across 5 key impact areas, including climate change, gender, soil health, sustainable livelihoods, and crop protection. So just as a quick reminder, the objectives of today's session is to first sort of shed light a little bit more on the climate change effects that are most specifically affecting smallholder farms, which can include changes in weather patterns, soil health, crop productivity, among other things. We also want to hear about and share good practices, highlighting successful adaptation strategies that you have been implementing or supporting farming communities around the world to adapt. And then we want to also explore a bit the importance of supporting frameworks and emphasize what is needed from the investment that are being discussed today at COP that can aid farming communities in their adaptation efforts. So with that, Nancy, if you could maybe get us a little bit started and tell us more about what you've seen from your experience as maybe the single biggest effect of climate change on smallholder content farming communities that you've been working with.
Okay. Thank you so much, Aline, and good morning, everyone. As indicated, my name is Nancy Nkomo, and I'm going to give you a sort of a perspective from the Southern African region, including Mozambique, where we then work with the Better Cotton Initiative. I think for some of the smallholder farmers that we work with, the major impact that I would say has been on their income. So in terms of the reduction of revenues that are coming in from cotton, and one of the reasons is because of the reduced yield. And sort of the root cause of that is the impacts of climate change, mainly I think through drought. So what's happening and the sort of erratic rainfall patterns. So a lot of the smallholder farmers, or most of the smallholder farmers that we work with, rely on rain-fed agriculture. So it means that when it doesn't rain or the rains come late, there's an impact on the yield. And so impacts like the drought, they then impact the soil quality, they then impact then the yield, and as a result of that, their incomes are then impacted. So I would say that would be the major impact that we're sort of facing and how it's affecting the livelihoods of smallholder farmers within the Southern African space.
Anything maybe that Saqib you would want to bring in from the Pakistan perspective? Is it really similar? Anything else you would want to add on?
I think whatever Nancy has said is pretty much reality for every small landowner farmer in the world. But to couple with that, the realities of the region adds on to that. She mentioned about drought. In Pakistan, the effects of climate change have been very pronounced. It is one of the top 5 vulnerable countries in terms of climate change. And one year we get drought, one year we are getting excessive flooding and rainfall. So the farmers are one year advised to crop late, one year they're advised to crop early, and that messes up with the whole ecosystem as well. So not only that, this is affecting the biodiversity, but the income cycles of the farmers. Just last year we have seen yields to decrease tremendously, more than 50% for some farmers, because when everything is so messed up in terms of rains, or in terms of use of fertilizers and pesticides and everything else, the farmers are unable to make the right choices at the right time. And that confuses not only them, but it's also confusing the biodiversity. Mm-hmm. The animals and plants and trees, mm-hmm. we have seen fertilization of fruits taking earlier, and they do not understand if it's like autumn time, winter time, or springtime. So that has affected the whole life cycle, and since the impact, since we're talking about the human adaptation and the impact to communities, the direct impact is on the income level. And we are seeing that farmers are now moving away from any kind of agriculture because it's becoming very difficult for them. So that is not good for the biodiversity, but also not good human-wise, because they're losing a lot of income from generations of work that they've done, and now they are not skilled enough to move into another direction. So that becomes a bigger burden on the economy as well. So a lot of need to upskill them in the new environment.
So you both mentioned big impact on income, due to impact on yield, impact on biodiversity, and so on. Anything you would want to highlight in terms of the human impact, like in terms of the health of farmers and workers, perhaps?
You want to go ahead, or should I?
Yeah, go for it.
Helen, you must have read a lot about heat waves coming in this year and last year, and we did like surveys in our own organization and the farm areas that we've worked with, and we found out that heat waves are directly impacting their health, impacting the crop yields as well. And what's happening is that with erratic climate and heat waves coming in, the health of the people who are working on the field gets affected so badly that they are becoming less and less productive. Mm-hmm. Not only that, as I said earlier, this is taking them away from doing farming. It's becoming very difficult for them. So what we are seeing is that people who have been doing this for generations are now selling land. Over there, agriculture is finishing, industries are being set up, which are not, again, helpful in that region. Zoning needs to be done. And secondly, housing societies are being made in that area as well. So all of that adds up, and the multiplier effect is that rather than a farmer through generations increasing his portfolio of work and making the cost of doing business lower, he's getting, it's increasing at a phenomenal rate.
Mm-hmm. No, thanks for bringing that perspective too. I mean, from all the work that you've been doing to support farming communities and combating climate change, is there, maybe Nancy, back to you, maybe one key example of an innovative farming practice that you have seen succeed and that you believe could really reach impact at scale?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think for this particular one, I'll maybe start by saying that in around 2022 season, what we started doing is looking into some of the opportunities that exist for smallholder farmers to increase their yields, to improve their soil health. And we looked at different sort of aspects. We looked at the legislative environment in terms of what would be conducive. And one of the items that we had sort of highlighted is that within the Cotton Act of the countries within Southern Africa, they're mandated to then destroy, after they've done the harvesting, they're mandated to destroy the waste that comes from the cotton. And this is really to sort of kill any pests and diseases that would have come with that particular season. So the typical way that they're doing it at the moment is they're burning it, because that tends to be the easiest, the most efficient. But what we then found is that if we support the farmers to then produce biochar, what we call biochar, which is essentially a black material which is made from residues, and it's essentially, you make it through the process of pyrolysis, where you expose biomass to extreme heat, and then it sort of decomposes. And if we then found that if they then do the biochar production, we support them to do the proper application, they then mix it with organic manure, and they put it into the ground. We found that and this is now the third season that we're doing it, their yield increases by over 3 times what would have been the case before. So biochar is really one of the ways that we've at least found to increase the yield, improve the soil health, because of the way that it retains water within the soil. So you'll find that if it rains late, at least there's still a little bit of moisture that's retained within the soil. But I think going beyond that, one of the challenges I'd also mentioned, the major challenge was around income, is that we've now found a way through the aspect of it being able to mitigate or to reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, or it being a carbon sink, to link them to carbon markets. So the farmers that were now doing biochar production in those particular seasons, we've now sort of linked them to carbon markets, and they should then be receiving their first payout soon for in terms of their contribution to the atmosphere for that. So that's a solution that I think is easily scalable, because, like I've indicated, the legislative environment is conducive. The number of cotton farmers, and it also then applies to other commodities as well within the sector, is quite large. So it's easily scalable. It's also a low technology innovation, so it's easily adoptable or implemented by the farmers. So that's the initiative, I would say, that Solidaridad has found to support in terms of yields, which ultimately lead to increased income.
Thank you for sharing that. Sakib, anything from, or maybe Lars, I don't know if you wanted to react, because I know we've been also taking some of the experience from Solidaridad around biochar. I know we're going to be embarking on that as well, including carbon credits, if you want to say anything to that.
I think it's good to realize that the carbon markets that are being discussed here today at COP can really drive this to scale, because we're really looking at scaling up with the farmers producing biochar and other carbon sink elements, and helping them adapt to climate change, to help with all the issues mentioned. But we're talking about millions and millions of farmers here. There's over 500 million smallholder farmers. We need to drive finance towards them. And there I'm really calling on everybody here at COP and outside of it. Let's make sure that at least part of the pie gets delivered to smallholder farmers, and make them part of the solution. And as flawed carbon markets sometimes can be, at least it's one source of driving finance to farmers, giving them ownership of results, and empowering them with the finances to do so, to invest in their farms and make sure they adapt to climate change and contribute to removing carbon out of the atmosphere. And I think that's a really powerful message, and the initial tests running with Solidaridad are an extremely good proof that this can work and that we can make it work.
At scale.
At scale.
Yeah. So you mentioned this is more of a sort of low technology kind of solution, right? Are there other really good initiatives, strategies, maybe Sakib, that you can talk to about Pakistan?
Sure. So 4 years back, we started our cotton program as well, together with Better Cotton and independently as well. And now we're working with around 3,500 farmers over 35,000 acres of land. And what we realized at the beginning of the program was that, to make any changes, we need to come out of primitive ways of agriculture. So we need to use a lot of technology. And to make improvement, like Peter Drucker used to say, that you can only improve what you can measure, right? So we need to start measuring what's happening at the farm level. And for that, we started with a startup in Pakistan who provided us with soil-based sensors and also satellite imagery. So that helped us in tracking the amount of moisture in soil, amount of fertilizers in soil, amount of the heat in soil, the pH and everything. So once we started to get that data, the first point was, the objective was to first just collect data and benchmark it, right? But at the end of the season, we were pleasantly surprised that by just using that data and without any other interventions, the farmers were able to reduce the usage of all these inputs by more than 40%, which was a big achievement for the farmers over there. And we only started out with like 50 acres of land. And today we are working with more than 1,000 acres of land with smart farming devices that help us provide that data direct to the farmers, helps them make better decisions in reducing the use, increasing the yields as well. Like Nancy was mentioning earlier, with climate change, we are seeing more dwindling yields. So smart farming, very important. Second thing is, we also did life cycle assessments of how it starts from the seed and all the way to the finished goods. So we also understand the impact of the product that we are creating and how it's impacting everyone. How it's impacting the farm area, how it's impacting the mills and processing sites, and also at the retail level. And from that data, we were now able to pinpoint our efforts, right? Just like Lars was saying, there's a lot of investment needed. So all that investment has to be very much targeted. So to have that success story, you need to make sure that you invest in the right direction. And most important point of that is you cannot do it in silos. So you have to engage the community. You cannot just go to the farmer and say, hey, you don't know anything and we know everything coming from the cities. You have to go and engage with them, more of sorts of that Japanese Kaizen technique, because the one who is working at its own workplace knows it best, right? So they can come out with a better solution. So providing them with options, asking them to pick and choose the best solutions, choosing the more progressive farmers to implement that, and then validating it through data and through certifications and verifications, and then getting it ready to scale and helping them. And again, the point that I keep repeating is we need to make all this very sustainable for the farmers. Just like Lars was saying in Nancy as well, all these projects require a lot of investment. And at the moment, the farmers, especially small landowners, they can either cultivate or they can invest in this. So we need to find ways, and this is a perfect opportunity at the COP that this message needs to resonate a lot more, that climate is not machines, it's not just automobiles or emitting carbon, it's human beings. So we need to go back and talk about them and how we can impact them.
I think it's important the point you mentioned about not working in silos and really doing, in fact, community engagement, right? You say listen to the farmers, like they are the ones who know. But can you tell us a bit more perhaps, or Nancy or Lars, about like what's at stake really for farmers? I mean, when they get started on a new approach, it's a big deal for them, right? It's quite risky to try something new. So how do you manage to find those champion farmers and then influence and make sure that they can influence others to have them embark on the same journey?
Maybe before somebody else jumps on it, I think especially the risks element is extremely important.
Yeah.
Farmers are now faced with both the risk of doing nothing and the risk of doing something new. They are suddenly in a very uncertain environment triggered by climate change. That is really like, if I don't do anything, will I get the same yields? Will I get the same performance of my farm? I don't know anymore. If I do something, is this really what is needed? How do I know what is needed? So all the smart data there is helpful, but it's still, you do need to imagine it's a smallholder farmer who's sometimes never been out of a village in the middle of nowhere in Africa or in India. And suddenly they need to rely on an app that tells them how to farm, even though they've used to do it from generation to generation. And I think that's an extremely difficult component to deal with. But I'm looking really forward how Nancy can tell us how we can do that.
Thanks. I think one of the very basic ways that we've done it that seem to work quite well is number one, piloting. So starting with a very small group, but also the other way that we've done it is as we're doing the trainings, we usually do what they call demonstration plots. So here we, for example, with the biochar example, we set up different areas where we are actually using this as like an educational field to say this is what can happen if you put biochar, because for the farmers, seeing is believing. And then you then get, the first farmers that see it and they say, okay, let me try it out. They try it out and it works. And then their neighbors then also want to try it out. And I'm reminded of, there's a picture that was shared recently within Solidaridad where for biochar, they use metal kilns. And for this particular one, what happens is you then need to move it to your particular farm to do the production of biochar. And so this particular farmer had taken a bicycle and was moving it kilometers away because they had seen that this particular biochar initiative is working on this field. I want it on my field regardless of how far I have to sort of move it. So I think it's showing them to see that this is what can happen, and then letting the sort of early champions, I think you called them, adopt that, and then it sort of, word of mouth moves around, they see it, and then from there they then start to adopt. Yeah.
No, that's really interesting to hear.
Actually, that's absolutely the right example, right? Once you have shown them how it works and how it benefits them, just like with smart farming devices or anything else, once someone sees that, then they start asking for that. We also do a lot of community work with alternative livelihood. So once a community sees that, a household is making good income out of that, then they just, come up with you with so many questions and answers about like how we can get this done, where we can get this information from. So yeah, that's the way to go. Word of mouth is the best way, rather than just imposing something on them without any data or reasoning.
And when you were talking about life cycle assessments, you were talking about more sort of data-driven strategies and so on. Do you feel like farmers are getting also really everything out of all this extra data, like for their own use? Do they get the full picture of because there's a lot more demand, right, for transparency in general, you were mentioning legislative frameworks earlier, but do they get most out of all this extra effort they're putting in measuring? You say we need to measure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your opinion on that?
So what Nancy earlier said, it's not easy for a farmer or anyone to start doing something. Like Lars was saying, it's a risk, right? He has to take that risk forward. What our job is to make their lives easier, mitigate that risk as much as possible, help them with the implementation as well. So we have teams at the ground who are working with these farmers, just like with the smart farming. If somebody does not have a cell phone or does not have interconnectivity, so we send our own people to help them, with the data and all. We also sell them reports. We can print it out for them in the local language. We also made sure all the apps were in local language so that they can understand better. And it's also more visual than words, right?
Yeah.
So the important aspect of that is convincing them on doing this better, and also showing them the rewards for it. Until the first farmer was able to achieve better yields and lower income, lower costs, right? This program would not flourish. So we have been doing this for 5 years now, so it shows that going from 50 to 100 farmers, and now we're working with more than 3,500, and now we get demand from the farmers that we need this device, we need this report, and a report is only numbers until you see the real implementation on their pockets, right? The incentive needs to be there. So yeah, that's the important part. If they see the impact on the bottom line, they will come follow you for any strategy.
Have you seen any success story, or do you have anything to say about women having played a particularly influential role?
Absolutely.
Okay. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. Contrary to many beliefs, especially in the farm area, the women hold the most power, right? They are the ones who are making a lot of decisions regarding what kind of work needs to be done, and they're driving the whole household, right? They start from morning till night, and they are controlling all the activities. So we invite them to be part of the decision-making process. We inform them, we train them, we build their capacity. And recently we started a new program, it's a female farmer empowerment program, in which there were female farmers who would own very small amount of land, like 1 acre or 2 acres. These are like hereditary land passed on to them, but they did not have the money to harvest. So we are giving out microfinancing at 0% interest, and 100% of them returned that money after that. And from 5 women, now we have scaled to 50 women now. So hopefully a part of funding that we're asking for at different organizations is going to go towards these farmers as well. But back to your question about female farmers and female workers, because we usually ignore the pickers, who are we feel the heart and soul of cotton picking, and who are the heart and soul of quality of cotton. So, and that's where the Better Cotton program also started, right? To improving the techniques and the lives of female cotton pickers. Because if they pick correctly, then you have good quality cotton. So we give them alternative livelihood programs in which in the off season they are also able to make some money and then they stay in one place. It's very similar in many countries. These women are migratory workers. So they move from one area to other during seasons and sometimes they don't come back the next year. So with these alternative livelihood programs, the training that we have imparted stays in that region. The families of these pickers stay in the region. They can get access to health, education, and other facilities. But when we ask them about what needs to be done, they are, Helena, are the perfect people to answer. Right? They provide us, okay, we need this, we need that, and this will improve our productivity, this will improve our health, it will improve our hygiene. And once they are in control, then they drive the whole community. So yeah, they are at the center of all these things.
Maybe one final point on the topic of scaling. I think we're now figuring out in a lot of ways how to do things on farms and drive change, both with empowering women, producing biochar. It's a whole combination of elements. But especially today here at the Standards Pavilion, these pilots develop into standard approaches, and that makes it scalable. And that's very important because now we're talking still often about very small numbers, thousands, tens of thousands, but we need to move all these kind of projects to the millions. And that really needs to be driven through approaches that are scalable, that are implementable across geographies, across communities, and help power those communities forward and become a part of the solution.
No, thanks for wrapping up on that. Yeah, please add on.
Thanks. If I can maybe add on the women question.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of solidarity and how we then include and sort of support women within the cotton sector, I would maybe say in two ways. I think the first way is through advocacy. So we do a lot of advocacy within the cotton space. So looking at submitting, for example, recommendations at a national level to different cotton acts, or whether it's also an organizational level, looking at developing gender and different acts within organizations. And so one of the ways we do that is through what we call multi-stakeholder platforms, where we then get different participants to, have their voices heard, come up with a common understanding and a common goal which they're advocating for. And we're very deliberate to then make sure that there are women representatives within these multi-stakeholder platforms, so that whatever recommendations are then submitted do then take into account the thoughts and the opinions of the women farmers. I think the second way that we look at it is also supporting them with what we call off-farm activities, right? So this is essentially, they grow cotton, but to maximize or to increase the amount of income that comes in, what other products can they, or value add, can they add to their products, cotton products off of the farm production? And what we've then started seeing is that some of the women farmers are now generating or making mushrooms out of the cotton rice. So they mix it with the grass, and then they use that as a sort of an incubator to then develop or to make their mushrooms. And we found that the size of the mushrooms is typically bigger if it uses the specific cotton. It has a longer shelf life, so there's benefits of including it, but we then support them to be able to have that additional income, in addition to the income that they'll be generating from the cotton sales themselves.
Oh, it's interesting. I think, Saqib, you were also saying that in Pakistan you've been supporting a lot of other sort of livelihoods type of generating activities beyond cotton farming. Is there anything that resonates
actually,
to the
I'm going to
work
talk to Nancy about this because, this is an interesting way of providing an alternative income. So for us, we start with honeybee harvesting. We have 3 solar power sewing centers for women, so they can learn sewing, and then we are trying to give them access to market so they can produce their products and then sell it as well. We also have these incubation boxes where they can hatch chicks, and then they can make more money out of that. So we tried with many things, and we found that again, going back to the previous question, Helen, that we asked these women, what do you think would be the best way forward for you? Which will let you use your time the most impactful way to generate that income. And from that question, I just remembered one quote from one of the grandmothers of the farmers. So when we started regenerative agriculture, and he went home after this training session, and he said to his grandmother that's his story, that we were taught these practices and we're going to implement that. And she looked at him funny, like, this is what we used to do 50 years back. Now you come back the full circle. You guys are so dumb. And Yeah, you should have listened to your grandmother 20 years ago. But yeah, that goes back to this thing. These people have all this information. They just need the right enabling environment to scale and grow.
And support.
And I think it's a good lesson to also see what's happening. I mean, you now see happening in cotton what used to happen in sugarcane. People literally dying from heat strokes in the field by simply not having enough shadow, not having enough water, especially women adversely affected by a much higher percentage. And we can see the lessons learned in Mexico, in sugarcane. It has already happened. And now suddenly, simply due to climate change, it's moving to more regions, more areas, whereas the regions where it was already hot, we already have lessons. And they're so simple. Invest in water, invest in shadow, just on farm field activities. But also with tricky conundrums. Processing factories, heat stress is also an issue. Heat stress in factories, they need to invest in AC. So because of climate change, we need to invest in AC, cause even more energy consumption and contribute even more to climate change. They're being put in a total catch-22. I need to reduce my power consumption. At the same time, I need to provide a decent workplace. And they're not compatible. And that is, I think, some of the details that we're talking about today that are on the ground, that are important to highlight how we can put people in the supply chain in very difficult positions.
No, thanks for bringing that up. Back perhaps to some of the solutions. We've mentioned a few. You gave the example on biochar. You talked about life cycle assessment, touched upon briefly carbon credits, bringing value back to the communities. What would you say, or maybe how would you say we could best move forward in scaling that up? We say these are all nascent projects. It all needs to be piloted first. It needs to be demonstrated. We need to have those influential farmers first who can show others that it works. Aligning also different stakeholders to get the support. But moving forward, like we're talking like this needs to really be scaled up. How do you think we could get there? Like what is really needed today?
Okay, so maybe if I can go first. I think we've essentially been speaking about it, which is investment. I think we've got a lot of organizations that understand the challenges on the ground, that speak to the farmers, that understand what it will take to then scale it up. But what I think is now needed is matching that particular drive or matching that particular opportunity with then investment. I think I'll go beyond just the investment part to say the right amount of investment. I think as you were introducing me, you indicated that I do business development, so I spend a lot of time developing proposals for some of these projects that we implement. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we faced is the costs that the investors think this will take to scale versus the actual cost of scaling. So I think there needs to be an alignment in terms of understanding that it actually costs way more to do this particular scaling and to impact farmers than the amount that investors are then putting into the initiative. So I think that would be my sort of next step, as you're asking, to say that I think there needs to be the right amount of finance put into scaling these particular initiatives.
And I think to join in on that, it's about both amount and time. It's about nature investments, and they have such a different time scale that especially now we're driving more and more towards really debt-based investments and making it investing with a return. We need to have very logical expectations for these kind of financing to work in agriculture, both in terms of the amount of returns and also the amount of time it takes to implement anything. A smallholder is usually tied to an agricultural season that lasts a year or longer. So whether we talk about biochar, agroforestry investments, if we have the carbon markets up and running, they still need to wait a long time. If that is at a 20 or 30% interest rate, all their additional benefits disappear again.
So investing for a 3 months pilot is really not enough?
No, absolutely not, I think.
Yeah.
We were fortunate enough when we were doing our smart farming initiative. We got some funding from the German Development Bank to increase the penetration of internet and connectivity in that region, so it works out. But I think we have been to all of these conferences, and we have been to COP. This is my fourth day. I feel like we don't really believe that climate change is happening. Right? We think that it's happening to someone else, and that's why there is no urgency. We hear some people so much talk about this, but when it's time to invest in that, people are missing. Like in apparel sector, we need $1 trillion to achieve 30% reduction by 2030. They've only been able to raise $24 billion. That's it. So you can see such a big gap in there, and no, there is no urgency in that. And you're not going to achieve any of those targets. Just like Lars said, every year a new challenge will come, which will put us in a vicious cycle of putting more energy to reduce energy. It doesn't make sense, but that's the reality. So my request to everyone is that, we have to be patient when we talk about agriculture. Agriculture can reduce our carbon footprint very quickly compared to whatever we do at other industries as well. And this is a great opportunity, I think people who are financing all these projects should go and visit the farm sometimes. You go and meet those people, how they're spending their lives, to understand the urgency of what's happening right now at the ground. Because it's an existential crisis for millions of farmers, and time is running out.
Yeah, you feel like investors are too far away, that they don't sense this urgency.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I might, just because we have a bit of time, we have a few people here, I might just open up the floor if anyone has a question, whether it is on one of the key sort of innovative farming practices that have been mentioned. I think Lars, you mentioned also briefly agroforestry. We haven't actually talked about that, but maybe if that's of interest, we could pick up on that briefly before we see any question coming from the floor. Yeah. Great.
Thank you, and thank you for the very insightful session. My question will be, how do we better track what is working? How, before we even get to scaling, how do we better track what is already working in terms of opportunity and the innovations that you've spoken about? I think any of you can answer.
I think it goes back to collecting data properly, right? And collecting data quickly and publishing it as well. Not keeping it secret with yourself, publishing it with everyone, with all the stakeholders. And I think this is where Better Cotton comes in as well, because they have access to millions of farmers. So that type of scale data, with over millions of data points, that can be really useful to find out what's going to work and what's not going to work. So we need to collect quickly, synthesize it quickly, and package it in a usable way for the farmers and everyone else involved in the supply chain.
Maybe if I can also comment on that one. So I think on the publishing angle as well, I think I agree with that. And I think it's looking at the different platforms that exist. I know, for example, the UNFCCC is about to, or they've launched a portal where the observers can post some of the projects that they're doing in the climate space. So this might be, one of the channels which we can post these particular items, because I know sometimes it's almost as if we're in competition with each other. But I agree that at some point we need to learn from each other. And so I think maybe that's one of the platforms you can look into to publish some of these best practices.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks to the panelists for the very useful insight. My attention was drawn when you were talking about the biochar. I knew about it working on sanitation, actually, and that made me think smart agriculture is key in our communities, especially in developing countries. But other needs are water scarcity is a problem, but also access to sanitation. And so my question is, are you considering having a circular economy framework integrating sanitation solution, like producing biochar and using it in smart farming, for example, in cotton farming? Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for the question. I think your question is if we are going to be using biochar within cotton. So I think if that's the question, then yes, the farmers the biochar example that I was giving is with cotton farmers. So the production within the cotton sector is already happening.
Yeah, and just to add one more point about also sanitation, right? So we are working with Alliance for Water Stewardship, and we're trying to get them certify some of our farm areas. So it's not about certification, it's about the whole framework for Alliance for Water Stewardship is about wash techniques, hygiene, sanitation, how to use water properly, how to dispose of waste properly, and also making the community aware about their catchment, where the water is coming from, the usefulness of that, and also how they take care of that. So yeah, these are the things that we need to do, and I think when we talk to Alliance for Water Stewardship, there are hardly any projects happening at the farm area. There are many happening in the urban areas, but these projects I think need to be scaled in that area as well, because to give you an example of Pakistan where we work, there's a good water presence underground, but most of the water has become so toxic due to arsenic because of the waste dump in the soil. So they cannot use it for themselves. So that's where the whole idea came from, that we need to work on that. So I think probably that needs to be done more with the farmers.
Yeah, perhaps that brings us back to the fact that we really need to look at it more from a holistic perspective and not keep on working in silos. At the end of the day, we're all trying to move in the same direction. And it's not good enough to have small, good little projects. This is my project, this is your project. Well, let's look at it at a broader sense of multi-stakeholder collaboration. If there's no more question at this point in time, yeah, I was thinking maybe it could be interesting to say a few words about the agroforestry, again, nascent project, but still, yeah, I think interesting example to give. Perhaps if one of you two want to talk to that.
Sure. It's interesting to see how the heat change of climate is affecting production very differently now. So you see the effects that we talked about, heat stress in cotton fields, heat stress on the farms, both for plants and people, as well as erosion. One year you have erosion, it's too dry. Next year there's no plants holding the soil, everything washes away in a mud flood, and every year in a different region. So different ways to start fixing that is by reintroducing plant growth again to cotton regions, and that can be very simple, agroforestry systems, planting trees around to cover crops, and making sure that we bring much more plant life back to agricultural communities. Mm-hmm. And here's the trickiness, it does go in competition with each other. Plants like water, they like sunshine, so it requires very careful balancing, things that our ancestors used to know, this tree is actually beneficial, that plant is beneficial, but we've lost that knowledge. So we need to go back to those old knowledge roots, bring back knowledge of forestry and crop integration systems where they help each other out. And I can't highlight enough, FAO has been doing a lot of work on this, but we still have a long way to go. Scientific research on cotton, there's only 2 studies looking at integrating agroforestry with cotton in the whole world in the past 20, 30 years. So just to signal the knowledge gap there, it's massive. We've growing cotton all over the place, and yet we don't know how to properly deal with the heat stress that climate change is causing. The only way that it then moves is move up north to colder areas and leave farmers behind in the areas that have gotten too hot. That is not what we want. That's the whole cause of migration stress, farmer stress, not growing their crops anymore. So we must limit that by figuring out these new systems, making sure the research is done, and that even agroforestry there where we don't expect it, make sure that we can make it work, because otherwise the farmers are just stuck and don't have anything else to resort to.
Yeah. And this is exactly why all of our projects has an element of biodiversity in it. We make sure that we plant trees. We have planted more than like 25,000 trees already in our farm areas. Some of them are like the agroforestry ones, some are like border cropping methodology as well. But the main point was like one of the farmers, he has his land which was barren for some time. So we asked them to donate this to the project. So for like 10 acres, we planted trees, and 4 years later, just like 3 months back, I visited, and now that land, after planting the trees, in the next 2-3 years can be useful for farming again. So that's the power of nature that we are missing. And that's why we also started regenerative agriculture in our farm areas, because we feel that it's a very holistic approach in improving soil health and also the whole community. So yeah, it's important. It's important that we think holistically and do not work in silos. And like Nancy was saying, do not just share everything, right? it should be a good competition in seeing who can share better and increase and scale this as quickly as possible.
No, thanks for these words. Any final word, any final wish or ask?
Maybe one final element. We often talk about mitigation and adaptation as silos as well, whereas for farmers, these are not silos. Farmers, their only source of emissions is fertilizer. They don't produce it themselves, usually it's produced in factories far away, and during the application, emissions occur. Helping farmers out is always tackling mitigation and adaptation. And that is a massive effect we can have in the world. When we really help farmers out, we can both reduce emissions and help them adapt to climate change and help them store carbon on the ground. So really call out for everybody you see here at COP today, farmers are the solution. Let's help them, empower them to become part of the solution.
I think if I can touch on the adaptation part of things, I think for that one, just to maybe go further and sort of say adaptation for one farm in a specific region. So for example, in Pakistan might be different in terms of the meaning of adaptation in Southern Africa, right? So I think my sort of call or my sort of plea would be, let's start by understanding what scaling would take within the different regions. Let's work with the people that are in those regions that need to adapt. And let's invest what is actually needed to be invested, the correct amounts into scaling. So those would be my parting shots.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I think my final words would be that, we should stop investing in wars and start investing in people. I think all that money will be available very quickly if we stop doing that, and people will be peaceful and happy as well. And yeah, I think I echo both what Lars and Nancy have said. It's important to contextualize for the region as well, and we just need to work together. I think we are here at the Standards Pavilion, so this is the place we should standardize with all multi-stakeholder organizations and MSIs to come up with a singular plan where we achieve the good for the farmers, the communities, and everyone else in the supply chain. So,
thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So investing at the right time, investing where it's needed, investing how it's needed, make it context specific, and yeah, going through not working in silos anymore. Thank you so much for making yourself available for this discussion. We're still around if you have any questions. Otherwise, I would love to invite you to give a quick feedback to the session. I think there should be a slide up with the QR code, so you can scan that and take that quick survey to help also make the session more meaningful and effective. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ellen, for inviting me.
Thank you.